Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of a Shabbat teaching by TBA Rabbinic Intern Nico Losorelli.
The title of the class is called Careful the Things You Say, Understanding Jewish Ideas Around Damaging Language. So this is a big one this high holiday season, right? Not only are we plumbing the depths of our souls and thinking about our actions, tied to that we're really thinking about our language and how our language impacts those around us and also ourselves, right? So this is a kind of a long-ish source sheet. We're gonna sail through it a lot faster than it appears that we are. So let's go ahead and get started here just with the first source. We're going to begin to move through a couple sources talking about what the rabbis thought about damaging language, around what they thought about Lashon Hara, talking about the stakes of Lashon Hara, how important it is that we avoid it, how important it is that we're careful with our language. And then we're going to work through some sources to think about what can we do to sort of take a pause in those moments when we feel tempted to, let's say, gossip or to share some sort of piece of information about somebody that we may or may not know is true. In the hopes that we can loop that into the work that we're doing during this Elul leading up to the high holiday season. Well, the high holidays. We're in the high holiday season right now. What am I saying? So first source here is from Baba Metzia 58b. Can I get any volunteers to read it in the English for us? Okay. Yeah, and I think we're going to be using, sorry, Bobby, I think we're going to be using the microphone as well, if you're okay, all right with that. Okay. So.
The Gemara relates that the Tana, who recited Mishnayot and Baraitot in the study hall, taught a Baraita before Rav Nachman ben Bar Yitzchak. Anyone who humiliates another in public, it is as though he were spilling blood. Rav Nachman ben Bar Yitzchak said to him, "You have spoken well, as we see that after the humiliated person blushes, the red leaves his face, and pallor comes in its place, which is tantamount to spilling his blood." Abaya said to Rav Dimi, "In the West, i.e. Eretz Yisrael, with regard to what mitzvah are they particularly vigilant?" Rav Dimi said to him, "They are vigilant in refraining from humiliating others. As Rabbi Hanina says, everyone descends to Gehenna except for three."
Thank you. So pretty severe thoughts around humiliating a person, right? Here in Bava Metzia, humiliating somebody is made equivalent to spilling blood, right? To killing a person, which is a pretty big no-no, right? I think we can all agree on that. I would love to hear some thoughts as to why. Why are the rabbis making this equivocation? Why have they made the stakes so high when it comes to humiliating somebody? You can take a second to think about that question. I'd love to hear an answer or two.
Because destruction of the temple was because of bad speech, or humiliating somebody.
Right, so great. So what Irv's talking about is the idea of sinat chinam, this famous reason for the destruction of the temple with Kamsa and Bar Kamsa, this sort of mistaken identity of one being invited to a party when he wasn't supposed to be, and his enemy saying, "Please leave, please leave." And he's saying, "Please don't humiliate me in front of my friends." Kicks him out. Then this guy goes and basically badmouths to the authorities, and that precipitates in the rabbinic mind the destruction of the temple, right? So I think that is an example of sort of the ripple effects that our words can have. Not only are we humiliating somebody, which is something that we obviously, or maybe not so obviously, we're saying it, so perhaps it's not so obvious, something we shouldn't be doing, but our words don't just stay where they land. They scatter. Yeah.
I spoke to someone today. He was a friend of mine.
Sure.
He left our organization 18 years ago, and he still has a grudge against someone he didn't like, who he mutually felt had a problem with the way he treated people. 18 years later.
Wow.
Excuse me, people have grudges that last back to their childhood, and they're 90 years old and they still have grudges that lasting back to their childhood. So 18 years is a drop in the bucket.
Well, I wouldn't say it's a drop in the bucket. It sounds pretty significant to me, but that just goes to show.
Because you're young.
Yeah, maybe, yeah. It goes to show the lasting effect of damaging language. It stays with us. It sometimes can become a part of us, and humiliation stays. It does. It's. I don't think I'm any different from any other person when I think about those moments when I felt humiliated. Sometimes we may be obsessing over them and processing them and thinking it through and just trying to get through it because it makes an impact on us when we experience humiliation at the hands of somebody else. Yes, Joey?
Yeah, it's like that story of the rabbi told someone to scatter the feathers from a pillow.
Mm-hmm. That's perfect. So there's this great story, which I'm sure many of you in the room are familiar with, but I'm just going to give the spark notes of it. There's this story where there's a man who was going around and he's basically bad-mouthing his rabbi, talking bad about him. He doesn't like him. And, eventually everyone sort of heard the gossip that he is spreading. And then he begins to reflect and feel badly. So he goes to the rabbi and he says, Rabbi, this is what I've been doing. I've been sharing all of this gossip about you, all of this hearsay, and I just feel so terrible. And I really want to ask you for your forgiveness. Will you forgive me? And the rabbi says, I'll forgive you. And he's like, okay. But first, before I forgive you, what I need you to do is meet me at the top of this building with a feather pillow. The man says, okay, a little bit weird. All right, sure, I'll get a feather pillow. I'll meet you there. Gets his pillow, meets the rabbi. They're at the top of the building, windy day. And the rabbi says, okay, now what I want you to do is I want you to take this feather pillow, cut it open, and scatter all the feathers. And the man says, okay, sure. I don't know if this is some ritual my rabbi wants me to do, but I'll do it. He's my rabbi. I owe it to him. So he cuts open the pillow, and all the feathers go flying through all the streets of the city. And for a moment, it's really quite beautiful. And then the man asks, okay, Rabbi, have you forgiven me? And the rabbi says, well, no, not yet. I'll forgive you when you can go and gather each and every one of those feathers and put them back into this pillow. And he says, Rabbi, that's impossible. How could I possibly gather all these feathers? They're everywhere. And the rabbi says, well, just like those feathers are everywhere and impossible to gather again, so too are the words of Lashon Hara, essentially, that you have spoken. Right. So thank you, Joey, for bringing that into our consciousness, to our awareness today. Any other thoughts before we move on to this next part of Baba Metzia? Yeah?
Use the mic or not?
No.
Okay.
So,
I'll try to sum up what you're saying, if that's okay.
Well, I'll try to speak louder. My question is, why are these people, I'm assuming this is Talmud Bavli, saying that in Jerusalem they are especially vigilant about Lashon Hara? What I want to know is, what is the significance of why they would be especially vigilant in this regard in Eretz Israel as opposed to Shechita, which would be another mitzvah?
Sure.
This particular one.
So the question is, why are we being told that folks are especially careful not to humiliate people in Eretz Israel? Why is there significance to them being in Eretz Israel? Thoughts? I think it's an interesting question. Thoughts? Reflections? Yeah?
You mentioned specifically Jerusalem, and I'm thinking immediately of the destruction of the temple.
Right.
So
Right.
It's like there's an energy component to it, the proximity to the place where a major damage occurred.
Right, I think that's great. That sort of brings back into the conversation what Irv brought up with Asina Chinam and Bar Kamsa on the destruction of the temple. But maybe it could be many things, but maybe it is just awareness of the damaging power of speech, specifically to the people in Jerusalem who experience that. Great, let's move on to the next part here in Baba Metzia. Can I have another volunteer to read in the English for us? Thank you.
This is from Baba Metzia 58b.
That's right.
The Gemara asks, does it enter your mind that everyone descends to Gehenna? Rather, say, anyone who descends to Gehenna ultimately ascends, except for three who descend and do not ascend. And these are they: one who engages in intercourse with a married woman, as this transgression is a serious offense against both God and a person, and one who humiliates another in public, and one who calls another a derogatory name. The Gemara asks with regard to one who calls another a derogatory name. That is identical to one who shames him. Why are they listed separately? The Gemara answers, although the victim grew accustomed to being called that name in place of his name, and he is no longer humiliated by being called that name. Since the intent was to insult him, the perpetrator's punishment is severe.
Great, thank you. Wow. First impressions, first thoughts. Again, we can take a second to sort of let that marinate.
I agree with it.
You agree with it?
The intent was to insult.
Can you say that one more time?
If the intent was to insult.
Uh-huh.
No,
So if the intent is to insult, even though someone has grown accustomed to a name, it may not necessarily hurt that person. There is still a level of punishment to the person because of their person who said the name because of their intention. Great. Yeah. All right. Well, I think this really drives home again the sort of severity of Lashon Hara, damaging speech. And this term Lashon Hara, we'll get to the definition, but it literally means an evil tongue, which is just such a funny thing to think about. So it's interesting that this idea of intent is brought into the equation here, even if you didn't necessarily, if somebody was, I don't know, let's say, in Mexican culture, for example, it's pretty common to give people nicknames based on their physical appearances. Growing up, I used to be called flaco a lot, which means like skinny. I'm not so flaco anymore. Working on it, but let's say somebody started calling me gordito, which means like little, like big guy. If I knew, hey, like that's what he's just kind of like giving me a nickname. But if his intention was to shame me, that intention would factor into sort of the punishment for that language, right? And it's a small example, but I'm confident that everybody in this room has an experience at least similar to that and can relate to this text. So we're going to continue to move through our source sheets here. We're going to be looking next at the Mishnah Torah. The Mishnah Torah is the Rambam's famous compendium, of halacha, of Jewish law. And he sort of gives us, he gives us a couple ideas about what the punishments for Lashon Hara are, what is Lashon Hara, and what it does to us. So another volunteer to read in the English, the first Mishnah Torah source here. Would you like to read it? Okay, thank you.
So, right here?
Yeah, it's just Mishnah Torah, Human Disposition 7.3.
Okay. Our sages said, there are 3 sins for which retribution is exacted from a person in this world and for which he is nonetheless denied a portion in the world to come. Idol worship, forbidden sexual relations, and murder. Lashon Hara is equivalent to all of them.
Whoa.
Yeah, whoa is right, yeah.
Our sages also said, anyone who speaks Lashon Hara is like one who denies God, as implied by Psalms 12:5. Those who said, with our tongues we will prevail, our lips our own, who is Lord over us? In addition, they say Lashon Hara kills 3 people, the one who speaks it, the one who listens to it, and the one about whom it is spoken. The one who listens to it suffers more than the person who speaks it.
Thank you. So we see here we're wrenching it up another level, right? It is so bad that not only is it equivalent to murder, it's actually worse than idol worship, forbidden sexual relations, and murder combined, right? So the Rambam is saying it's even worse than you think. And not only that, it does damage to all kinds of people. It does damage to the person who speaks it, to the one who listens to it, and the one about whom it is spoken. And so I would like to hear some just impressions on that damaging the person who says it, the person who listens to it, and the person who speaks it.
Well, it's interesting about the person who speaks it, who listens to it.
Uh-huh.
Because we all listen to it, right? So what he's trying to do is basically young ladies, can you please, one meeting? Thank you. I'm a union organizer. I know how to do this stuff. It didn't work evidently, but no, seriously. What I'm thinking about just as I'm speaking is that what I think he's trying to say is it's incumbent of us when someone does lashon hara to stop it.
That's
That's what I got out of it, and
yeah.
I plead guilty to spreading it, and I plead guilty to not stopping it. So this is have a special restorative justice evening for me.
Sure, and I think this is when we talk about when we do our kind of famous communal vidui, when we see everything in the plural, right? Bagadnu, gazalnu, I have stolen, I have uttered falsehood, all of these things. It's a collective sort of sin, because whether or not we spread lashon hara, we hear it, and we may not do anything about it. The hope is that we will, but it doesn't mean that we do. And it damages in many ways, I think, the person who hears it, because then it puts them in a position to ask themselves, am I going to do something about it, right? So not only is the one who is spreading lashon hara hurting the person about whom they're speaking, they're also putting the people who hear it in an ethically compromised situation, right? So again, we can sort of see why the Rambam is saying that this is worse than all of these horrible other sins combined, lashon hara is. Great. Any other thoughts before we continue to move forward with the Mishnah Torah?
I just find it curious that we're talking about gossip or speech about a person. We're not strictly speaking about lying. And I don't know what to make of that. Well, first,
on the evening news.
Well, hold on. Just let him finish this thought,
question
please.
that does it matter if it's what someone is saying is true, but I don't know, maybe abusive about the person they're speaking about? Yeah, I can see how lying can be something that should be strictly prohibited. I mean, there's the line about distancing yourself from falsehood, but I don't know, selling some fake product that you say is going to make you healthy and it's poisonous or something like that. But it's just it's so severe to specifically talk about another person.
Well, I think that actually leads us beautifully into this next part of the Mishnah Torah, if you'd be willing to read it to us in the English. Is that all right?
Sure. Yeah.
Thank you.
So, Mishnah Torah, Human Dispositions 7:4. There are certain matters which are considered the dust of Lashon Hara. What is implied? For example, a person says, "Who will tell so and so to continue acting as he does now?" Or, "Do not talk about so and so. I do not want to say that what happened," or the like. Similarly, it is also considered the dust of Lashon Hara when someone speaks favorably about a colleague in the presence of his enemies, for this will surely prompt them to speak disparagingly about him. In this regard, King Solomon said, in Proverbs 27:14, one who greets his colleague early in the morning in a loud voice curses him, for his positive act will bring him negative repercussions. Similarly, to be condemned is a person who relates Lashon Hara in frivolity and jest, as if he were not speaking with hatred. This was also mentioned by Solomon in his wisdom, Proverbs 26:18-19, as a madman who throws firebrands, arrows, and death and says, "I am only joking." Also, to be condemned is someone who speaks Lashon Hara about a colleague slyly, pretending to be innocently telling a story without knowing that it is harmful. When he is reproved, he excuses himself by saying, "I did not know that the story was harmful or that so-and-so was involved."
Great, thank you so much. And so that brings in this idea of well, what if what you're saying is, which is what you were telling us before, asking the question, what if what you're saying is true? And here we can clearly see, even if something is true, it can be considered avak lashon hara, which literally means the dust of lashon hara. And we'll get into the definition of that in one second. But for now, let's think about it as something that's sort of like lashon hara adjacent, or can lead to lashon hara. The Rambam is saying, you maybe you're just making a joke, but you also know that it's kind of a terrible thing to say, and you want to protect yourself by saying, "Oh, just relax, it was just a joke." Still not good. Still avak lashon hara. Could be that you have a friend who's just really good at Hebrew or something, for example, right? And there are classmates that are jealous of her, and someone comes up and says, "Wow, I heard you did really well in your Hebrew exam. You got 100%." and loudly in front of the people who are jealous of her. And it could be that those people suddenly then feel some resentment against her, which could lead to Lashon Hara or other, hopefully just Lashon Hara. And the thing you said was true, right? The thing you said was true, but you said it in front of people who may not have the best interests of this person in mind. Great. I would like to hear any other thoughts, impressions. Well, just hold on one second if we can get the.
It just seems to me that without further context, this particular passage goes too far.
Goes too far. Okay.
Yeah,
Say more.
Because of course you greet your colleague energetically in the morning. Of course, I'm with colleagues every morning.
Mm-hmm.
We greet each other. So this seems to me there must be more to the context here, because that would to follow this would inhibit me so much. I'd be afraid to open my mouth, especially to make a joke. People have different political points of view. I mean, it's just if you don't joke about it, you take it too serious, it becomes oppressive.
Sure. So that's a great point. Is this going too far? Is this too much? Is this too much to ask of a person? I don't know. I wonder if we think it's going too far, then maybe that means that we need to be thinking more about our speech. Because it could be just like the feathers. We've cast a feather, it's gone off into the wind, but we don't know where it's gone. We don't know if we can get it back. So not to say that, in making a joke, somebody necessarily has ill will, but to just sort of flash us back to Baba Batra, even though, I would flip it on its head. It could be that, like, even if you didn't have ill will, you could have had a negative impact, right? Even that wasn't your intention. But yeah, it's a lot to ask. It's difficult, and it's difficult to navigate. And I certainly won't deny that. So.
I think all you gotta do is turn on the evening news. Donald Trump calls everybody stupid, everybody's a liar, everybody's conniving, everybody's. He's the biggest name caller there is, and he's a presidential candidate. And I keep wondering, how do we let this guy get away with it? He's a presidential candidate. And he doesn't mention anything specific. He doesn't mention, like, if you would name a specific legislation that somebody backed that you don't agree with, and you want to bring out why you don't agree with it, why it was a bad choice. That's one thing. But when you're just plain saying everybody who's running the government is stupid, which he does say, he did say that in a speech. Yes.
So if I can just sort of reflect back what Rosa is saying for the people who will be listening to this later or currently listening to it, it's important for our leaders to be especially aware of the impact of their words, right? To be even more judicious with the way in which they speak to and about other people, because when you have look, if this shiur is being recorded and people will listen to it on Spotify, I hope. If not, that's okay too. If I were to say something terrible, God forbid, that would be abdicating my responsibility as a sort of fledgling leader here in my capacity as a rabbinic intern, and that would be unbecoming of a future leader, right? So we need to be especially careful because, at the end of the day, we are really looking to our leaders for an example. Yeah, Bobby?
Yeah, I just want to second that. In terms of the point that you were making about being, concerned about being too sensitive of saying or doing anything, and I think, we as a people are very sensitive and very thoughtful to the extent that we put fences around a lot of things, right? Whether it's Lashon Hara or the way we keep Shabbat or whatever. And I think that, with each individual person, we see the B'Tselem Elohim in them, we see the holiness in them, and it's a sense of getting to know them and who they are and what makes them tick and what resonates with them. And sometimes we're going to fall short, and I think it's just a matter of learning from those mistakes and reapplying ourselves and choosing more careful language for the people that it matters to. It was funny though, just as a joke when I was saying good morning to somebody. I feel like that's like the analogy to like my wife or me who haven't had coffee yet in the morning, and the other person's like really jovial and says good morning, and they're like really cranky because they haven't had anything yet.
I haven't had coffee since 1992.
Well, so in the interest of time, I'm going to sort of move us through our sources a little bit quickly. Thank you for that. Bobby, would you actually be able to read us this next definition of Lashon Hara and Avak Lashon Hara?
The adverse criticism?
That's right, yeah.
Okay, adverse criticism and gossip in Leviticus 19, verse 6 is forbidden. 16, excuse me. It is forbidden to mention disparaging things in conversation about another person, even if they are true. False disparaging remarks are considered an even more serious sin under certain conditions.
So it's motzi shem ra, so bringing about a bad name.
Motzi shem ra. Under certain conditions, remarks are. It may be permitted to mention matters that are already public knowledge. The sages extended the scope of this prohibition and forbade many other forms of gossip, referring to them as avak lashon hara.
The dust.
Mm-hmm.
The dust of lashon hara.
Exactly.
Included in this category are statements that are not themselves harmful to the person mentioned, but might prompt others to make disparaging remarks. The sages frequently mention the severity of this prohibition, declaring that it is equivalent to the most serious sins, such as murder and adultery. Talmud Reference Guide, the Stein-Salz edition.
Thank you. So this definition really brings together all the things that we've been talking about, right? Whether it's true, whether it's not true, whether it could lead to even more severe lashon hara. All these things, they are forbidden, to use a very dramatic word. Great. So let me just take a quick glance here to see what it is we can accomplish in the next couple of minutes. So I'm just going to move us through the next couple of sources, and then we'll sort of come together and talk a little bit about it more. So I'm going to skip the Sanhedrin piece for now. So Pirkei Avot here. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel used to say, on three things does the world stand: on justice, on truth, and on peace. As it is said, execute the judgment of truth and peace in your gates. So, actually, I really have to bring in the Sanhedrin for this, so let's go back to that. So, in the Sanhedrin 6b, Rabbi Yoshua ben Korcha says, is it not that in a place where there is strict judgment, there is no true peace, and in a place where there is true peace, there is no strict judgment? So, if the world stands on three things, truth, peace, and judgment, but if there's strict judgment, there's no peace, and if there's strict peace, there's no judgment, then what's the middle ground between peace and judgment? I would say it's truth. And the truth is not an easy thing to get at, right? Many of us have heard the sort of the old adage that, you have your story and I have my story, and the truth is somewhere in between. It may not be that the result of that is totally peaceful or totally judicious, but at least we're working together to find some sort of truth. Yeah.
What's being said essentially is that if you say, okay, we're going to make peace with everything, then you don't have any judgments and you don't have any standards.
Right.
You're right, everybody's right, then there is no such thing as truth or standards, etc. Mm-hmm. But if you're going to, and we all have compassion for our own faults without exercising compassion for somebody else's faults.
Right.
So the question becomes, how do you balance? Moral excellence is oftentimes in the balance.
Yeah.
And the balance is between strict judgment, then everybody fails. Mm-hmm. Strict peace, then nobody's doing anything wrong. Mm-hmm. And consequently, you have to achieve a certain measure of balance. The rabbis also ironically balance this with one other category that presumes that gossip is going to be a full measure of reality, because they have the concept of maritayin. Mm-hmm. What's called maritayin. You can't do certain things because certain people are going to misinterpret that and presume something else.
Right.
And part of the discipline of a culture, ironically, is gossip. And part of what the rabbis admonished is don't do certain things because people are going to say X, Y, and Z about you. And consequently, they presume that. And if you do a sociology of religious orthodoxy, in Judaism, you will find that gossip is one of the major tools of discipline.
Of discipline?
Of discipline.
Okay.
You don't do certain things because what people will say about you. And consequently, as they admonished, they also understood that it was a natural modality of human behavior, and they erected a range of restrictions
right.
to make sure that it didn't get out of hand.
A lot of on gossip, though, it served a real purpose, because once upon a time, we didn't have the communications that we have today, and the way people got the news was basically through gossip, so to speak. Like, let's say you're in a shtetl in Russia, and word is spreading that there's a massacre in another village or something like that. People basically relied on gossip to get the news, but suddenly their communications are way more sophisticated these days.
Sure. So if I can, yeah.
Puts gossip in another perspective.
Mm-hmm.
What's very, very common in a lot of places, I saw this when I was in the Army, I've seen it, with it's in colleges and everything, people getting, the football team or somebody, they get together with a bunch of beers and they basically are gossiping about other people.
Right. So if I can just, Rosa, reflect back what you're saying, only because we're beginning to run out of time, that gossip actually does have some sort of utility to it, or at least used to. And at the same time, there needs to be an awareness of what we're doing, because you could lead people to gossiping, right? I'm just trying to bring something out of these two points together, which I think in a way also sort of brings in the idea of brings in Marat Ayin, sort of in my mind, based on to not putting a stumbling block before the blind. You could be seen as someone who's supposed to model specific behavior, and if you're modeling incorrect behavior, you may be telling people or leading them to believe that, this is the right kind of behavior. And then they may go on and imitate what you're doing, and you have led them astray, which is not great. And I think also sort of speaks again to the stakes of being mindful of our language, because at the end of the day, what we say is not just about our experience about us. It's about what it says, not only at the Peshat level, but at the sort of deeper societal level. So let me just look here really quick. I want to just move us through these last couple of sources, and then we're going to conclude here. So our next source here in Pirkei Avot, Hillel said, "Do not separate yourself from the community. Do not be sure of yourself until the day of your death, and do not judge your fellow until you have reached his place." So essentially, one of the things that's being said here is don't be so sure of yourself. You may think that something is true, but you should really be humble, and you should probably confer with other folks before making some kind of determination, so much so that here in this next pasuk, Devarim 17:6, a person shall be put to death only on the testimony of two or more witnesses, and no one shall be put to death on the testimony of a single witness. And this is to say that, again, the stakes are high. If the rabbis are thinking of Lashon Hara as being, in a way, equivalent to murder, to spilling blood, then who are you to be wielding the sword alone, right? Who are you to be spreading some sort of falsehood that could then potentially lead to someone's death? If we're going to make some sort of decision, it can't be alone, especially when the stakes are so high. And the information that comes into our lives through our ears, through our eyes, and what comes out is something that we really need to be very cognizant of and careful of, because it could seem like a light, joke about somebody, but it could be really something that's hurtful to that person. That person's not there to defend themselves. It could be something actively damaging, and also that's obviously not so good. And it could be that you have no idea that this is going to hurt a person. So I just want to conclude here with what Rabbi Alan Liu says in his book, This Is Real and You're Completely Unprepared, which many folks have gotten the habit of reading every high holiday service. He brings in a holiday season, He brings in this interpretation of this Hasidic commentary, the Iterei Torah, and I'm quoting this from his book, about a pasuk at the beginning of currently still this week's Parsha Shoftim. You shall appoint magistrates and officials for your tribes and all the settlements that your God is giving you, and they shall govern the people with due justice. So this is the interpretation of the Torah says in Rabbinic and Rabbi Liu's summation, there are 7 gates, 7 windows to the soul, 2 eyes, 2 ears, 2 nostrils, and the mouth. And everything that passes into our consciousness must enter through one of these gates. So at the deepest level, the passage cited above has nothing to do with the establishment of a system of judges and courts, but deals rather with being mindful of the process of consciousness itself. So as we move around our day-to-day, talking about ourselves, talking about one another, things we've heard on the news, we need to be really cognizant of what's coming in and also what's coming out. And not only that, even though it may seem like a light experience, maybe it's just everyday speech in the morning, you're saying hi to a friend and whatnot, it could be that our words, have repercussions that we can't foresee. And on that note, it's important to think that even though we may think that something is true, whether it's good, damaging, whatever, as Pirkei Avot says here in this last source, "V'haveh dan et kol adam lechaf zechut," judge every person favorably, right? Because when we're talking about folks who are not in the same room, they're, again, not there to defend themselves. Could be that we have come to one conclusion without the consultation or fair consultation of other opinions and conclusions, and maybe spreading some sort of falsehood which has all of these ramifications, whether our intentions were good or bad. So as we move through Elul, as we move towards the high holidays, I want us to keep all these ideas in mind, because so much of the time spent during the high holidays is going to be words. We're going to be going through this very long machzor. It's going to be nothing but words. In our tradition, in the Jewish tradition, we know that words have power, they have import, and they have the capacity to create worlds, and they have the capacity to destroy worlds. So with that...
Said, sticks and stones can break my bones, but words could never hurt me, was definitely not Jewish. Definitely not Jewish. Nobody Jewish would say something that stupid.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.